The air inside the first-class cabin of Regal Horizon Flight 902 was pressurized and chilled, yet the glare Preston Montgomery shot at the teenager in seat 1A burned hotter than jet fuel. He didn't see a 17-year-old boy with headphones. He saw an error, a glitch in his exclusive platinum status world. When the senior flight attendant reached for the boy's wrist to physically remove him, she thought she was simply taking out the trash. She had no idea she was laying hands on the son of the woman who owned the very tarmac they were parked on. This isn't just a story about a stolen seat. It's about the catastrophe that follows when prejudice collides with absolute power. JFK. Airport was a chaotic symphony of rolling luggage, frantic announcements, and the distinct hurried rhythm of New York City. But inside the hull of the Boeing 777, designated for Regal Horizon Airlines, the world was silent and smelling of expensive leather and champagne. Jordan Banks adjusted the noise-canceling headphones over his ears, drowning out the low hum of the auxiliary power unit. At 17, Jordan had the kind of lanky, growing-too-fast build that made him slouch slightly to fit into spaces, but in seat 1A, a lie-flat pod with a privacy partition, he finally had room to stretch. He pulled the hood of his charcoal gray sweatshirt up over his head. It was a comfortable, oversized garment from a university gift shop, worn soft at the elbows. To the casual observer, he looked like any other teenager trying to disappear into his music. To the man currently boarding the aircraft, however, Jordan looked like a stain on a silk sheet. Preston Montgomery adjusted the cuffs of his bespoke Italian suit as he stepped onto the plane. Preston was a man who wore his net worth like armor. He was 45, with silvering hair carefully gelled back, and a jawline that seemed permanently set in a clench of dissatisfaction. He held a platinum medallion status card in his hand, though he didn't need to show it. He expected the crew to know him by scent. "Good afternoon, Mr. Montgomery." The flight attendant at the door chirped her smile tight and practiced. "Welcome back to Regal Horizon. Seat 2A as usual. 2A. Preston stopped, his brow furrowing. "I specifically requested the bulkhead. 1A. I need the extra legroom for my briefcase setup." "I apologize, sir," the attendant said, glancing at her manifest. 1A was booked 3 weeks ago. The cabin is full today." Preston didn't respond. He simply brushed past her, marching into the first-class cabin with the entitlement of a man who had never been told no without firing someone shortly after. He stopped abruptly at the first row. There in the seat he considered his birthright was Jordan. Jordan had his eyes closed, head bobbing slightly to a bass line only he could hear. His sneakers a rare vintage pair of Jordans that cost more than a mid-size sedan were scuffed at the toe. His backpack was shoved haphazardly into the corner. Preston stared. He looked at the boy's dark skin, the hooded sweatshirt, the relaxed posture that screamed loitering rather than lounging to Preston's biased eyes. The narrative in Preston's head wrote itself instantly. Affirmative action upgrade. Employee non-rev ticket. Lucky lottery winner. "Excuse me," Preston said, his voice loud enough to cut through the ambient noise of the cabin. Jordan didn't move. The noise cancellation was excellent. Preston's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He leaned in, snapping his fingers directly in front of Jordan's face. "Hey, kid." Jordan flinched, his eyes snapping open. He pulled the headphones down around his neck, looking up with a mixture of confusion and teenage grogginess. Yeah. Can I help you? You're in my seat," Preston lied smoothly. It was a power move he'd used before. Confusion usually led to compliance. Jordan frowned, reaching into his pocket to pull out his boarding pass. He checked it, then looked back at the small brass placard on the suite wall. 1A. No, I think this is me. My ticket says 1A. Let me see that, Preston demanded, extending a hand. He didn't wait for permission. He snatched the fragile slip of paper from Jordan's grip. He scanned it. Jordan Banks, JFK to LHR, Seat 1A. The ticket was valid. But to Preston, it felt fraudulent. It didn't make sense. Kids didn't sit in international first class unless they were wearing blazers and accompanied by a nanny or a parent. This kid was alone, looking like he'd just walked off a basketball court in Queens. "Where are your parents?" Preston asked, dropping the ticket onto the boy's lap with a sneer. "They're around," Jordan said, his voice guarding a secret. "Look, man, I'm just trying to sleep before we take off. Can you chill?" "Chill." The word grated on Preston's nerves like sandpaper. "Don't speak to me like that," Preston snapped. He turned around, scanning the aisle for an ally. He found one in Brenda Gables. Brenda was the purser, the head flight attendant for the flight. She had been flying for 30 years and had developed a radar for trouble. Unfortunately, her radar was calibrated by decades of subtle prejudice and a desire to keep her high-tipping frequent flyers happy. She saw Preston Montgomery standing over a hooded teenager, and she immediately categorized the scene: valued customer versus disturbance. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Montgomery?" Brenda asked, rushing forward, her heels clicking sharply on the galley floor. "There is a massive problem, Brenda," Preston said, gesturing at Jordan as if presenting a dead rat. "I booked this seat. I always sit in 1A, and somehow this individual is occupying it. I suspect there's been a system error, or perhaps a security breach." Brenda looked at Jordan. She saw the hoodie. She saw the lack of eye contact. Jordan was looking out the window now, trying to ignore the man berating him. She made a snap judgment. "Sir," Brenda said, addressing Jordan with a tone that was technically polite, but dripped with ice. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Jordan sighed, picking the ticket up from his lap again. "I just showed him. It's 1A. Brenda took the ticket. She examined it under the light. It looked real. But in her mind, she was already running through scenarios. Maybe he printed a fake one? Maybe he swapped with someone. It was unheard of for a teenager to be flying solo in a $10,000 suite without a VIP protocol note on her manifest. She checked her tablet. Seat 1A Banks, J. No status listed. No VIP tag. Just a name. "Mr. Banks," Brenda said, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper meant to save face for him before she kicked him out. "How did you acquire this ticket?" Jordan looked at her, genuinely baffled. "My mom gave it to me." Preston let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "His mom? Did she use her miles from cleaning houses? Or did she find it on the floor?" The air in the cabin shifted. Several passengers in rows 2 and 3, a tech CEO named David and a fashion editor named Chloe, looked up from their screens, sensing the tension. They stayed silent, the bystander effect holding them in their luxury seats. Jordan's jaw tightened. The comment about his mother hit a nerve. He sat up straighter, his eyes hardening. "Watch your mouth." "Excuse me," Brenda interjected, stepping between them but facing Jordan. "You will not threaten other passengers on this aircraft." "He just insulted my mother," Jordan said, his voice rising slightly. "And I have a valid ticket. Why are you grilling me? Ask him for his ticket." Brenda bristled. "Mr. Montgomery is a global services member. I know who he is. I don't know who you are, young man. And quite frankly, your behavior is becoming aggressive." "Aggressive?" Jordan laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "I'm sitting down. He's the one standing over me screaming." "I am not screaming," Preston said calmly, adjusting his tie. "I am demanding that Regal Horizon maintain its standards. I paid $12,000 for a premium experience. I did not pay to sit next to a delinquent who probably snuck in during the pre-boarding chaos." Preston turned to Brenda, his voice dropping to a dangerous ultimatum. "Brenda, I want him moved. Put him in economy where he belongs. Or I'm calling the CEO. I played golf with the VP of Operations last week. Do you want me to mention your name? Brenda paled. She was 3 years away from retirement. She needed her pension. She looked at Jordan, a nobody in a hoodie. Then she looked at Preston, a man who could ruin her career with a single email. The choice to her was obvious. "Sir," Brenda said to Jordan, her voice stealing, "I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things." Jordan stared at her. "You're joking, right? I have a ticket." "We have a situation of overbooking and seat duplication," Brenda lied, improvising rapidly. "And since Mr. Montgomery is a priority status member, he has the right to the seat. I can find you something in economy comfort." "I'm not moving," Jordan said firmly. "My mom is boarding soon. You can talk to her." "We don't have time to wait for your mother," Brenda snapped, checking her watch. "The doors close in 10 minutes. If you don't move voluntarily, I will have to classify this as a refusal to comply with crew instructions. That is a federal offense." "You're kicking me out because I'm black and he's rich," Jordan said plainly. He didn't shout it. He stated it as a fact. "Don't play the race card with me," Preston spat. "It's about class, and you clearly have none." "That is enough," Brenda commanded. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small radio. "Captain, this is the cabin. We have a non-compliant passenger in 1A. I might need security at the gate." Jordan's eyes went wide. He wasn't scared of the flight attendant, but the threat of security police was different. He knew how these interactions ended for boys who looked like him. He pulled his phone out, his thumbs flying across the screen. "Mom, 911. They are trying to kick me off the plane." Row 1. He hit send. The message delivered just as Brenda reached out and grabbed his backpack strap. "Don't touch my stuff," Jordan said, yanking it back. "Then move," Brenda shouted, losing her professional veneer entirely. "Get up now. Make me," Jordan challenged, crossing his arms. Preston leaned down his face, inches from Jordan's ear. "You're going to regret this, boy. You're going to leave this airport in handcuffs, and I'm going to enjoy my champagne in your seat while you sit in a holding cell." "Mr. Montgomery, please take your seat in 2A for a moment while I handle this," Brenda said, trying to regain control. "I'm calling the gate agent." As Preston smirked and settled into the seat behind Jordan, stretching his legs aggressively into the gap, Jordan saw the 3 dots appear on his phone screen. His mother was typing. Then a text came through. "Don't move. I'm at the jet bridge." Jordan took a deep breath. He looked at Brenda, who was angrily whispering into the flight interphone, and then at Preston, who was already opening a magazine, acting as if the war was won. "You really shouldn't have done this," Jordan said softly. Preston didn't even look up. "Save it for the public defender, kid." Jordan sat back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He turned up his noise-canceling headphones not to listen to music, but to dampen the sound of the storm that was about to break. He watched the front door of the plane. The first twist of this knife was about to happen. But nobody in the cabin, least of all Brenda Gables or Preston Montgomery, knew who was walking down that jet bridge. They thought they were dealing with an unruly teen mom. They were expecting a woman who would beg or scream or make a scene they could mock. They weren't expecting the hurricane in Dior heels. The atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted from awkward tension to a suffocating, static-charged dread. The luxury of the first-class cabin, the scent of warm nuts, the soft, ambient lighting, the hushed tones of wealth, clashed violently with the raw, ugly reality unfolding in row 1. Brenda Gables stood by the galley partition, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her face a mask of self-righteous indignation. She had committed to a narrative. Now the boy was a threat. To back down would be to admit a mistake, and Brenda Gables did not make mistakes. Not in front of platinum members like Preston Montgomery. Captain Miller emerged from the cockpit, ducking his head slightly under the doorframe. He was a man of few words, exuding the weary authority of a pilot who just wanted to push back from the gate and beat the incoming weather over the Atlantic. "What is the issue, Brenda?" Miller asked, his voice low, scanning the scene. "Disruptive passenger captain," Brenda said, pointing a manicured finger at Jordan. "Refusal to comply with crew instructions, verbal aggression, and he is occupying Mr. Montgomery's seat without authorization." Miller looked at Jordan. He saw a kid in a hoodie, slouching, clutching a phone. He looked at Preston, who was sitting upright, radiating the kind of litigious energy that airlines feared most. "Son," Miller said, stepping into the aisle, "I need you to grab your bag and step off the aircraft. We can sort this out at the podium." "I have a ticket," Jordan said, his voice shaking slightly. The adrenaline was starting to curdle into fear. "Why won't anyone look at my ticket?" "We've seen it," Preston interjected smoothly from behind. "It's clearly fraudulent. Or stolen. Captain, I've been flying this airline for 20 years. I have never seen security this lax. I feel unsafe." Unsafe. It was the magic word. In the post-9/11 world of aviation, unsafe was a kill switch for all logic and negotiation. Miller sighed. He didn't have time to be a detective. "Okay, Brenda, call Port Authority. I want him removed. Now." Jordan's thumbs hovered over his phone screen. "Where are you?" "Mom." 10 minutes later, the heavy thud of boots on the jet bridge echoed through the silence of the cabin. 2 Port Authority officers squeezed through the boarding door. One was older, with a thick mustache and a name tag that read O'Malley. The other was younger Diaz, looking nervous, but eager to assert control. "Who's the problem?" O'Malley asked, his hand resting casually, terrifyingly on his belt. "Row 1, Brenda said, stepping aside like a matador opening the gate for a bull. "He refuses to leave." The officers marched down the short aisle. The space was cramped. To get to Jordan, they had to loom over him, blocking out the light. "Let's go, kid," O'Malley grunted. "Don't make this hard." Jordan held up his hands, palms open. "I'm not doing anything. I paid for this seat. I'm waiting for my mother." "You're trespassing on a federal aircraft once the captain tells you to leave," O'Malley said. He didn't wait for a response. He reached out and grabbed Jordan's upper arm. The grip was tight, bruising. Jordan flinched, pulling his arm back instinctively. "Don't touch me." "Resisting!" Diaz shouted, escalating the situation from 0 to 100 in a heartbeat. The 2 officers lunged. In the confined space of the first-class suite, it was a mess of limbs and shouting. They yanked Jordan out of the seat. His headphones clattered to the floor. His backpack was kicked aside. "I'm not resisting. I'm not resisting," Jordan cried out, panic rising in his throat. He knew the script. He knew that if he moved the wrong way, he could die. He went limp, letting them drag him into the aisle. "Get him off my plane," Preston yelled, standing up to get a better view. He had his phone out now, recording the incident. "Look at him, fighting animal." "Sir, sit down," Diaz barked at Preston, but he didn't stop dragging Jordan. They slammed Jordan against the bulkhead wall near the galley. O'Malley twisted Jordan's arm behind his back, forcing his wrist up toward his shoulder blades. The pain was sharp and blinding. "You have the right to remain silent." O'Malley droned, the metal cuffs clicking ominously. "Please," Jordan gasped, his face pressed against the plastic wall paneling. "Check the manifest, please." "Shut up," Brenda said, leaning in. "You had your chance to leave quietly. Now you're going to jail." From the 3rd row, the fashion editor, Chloe, stood up. "Hey, that's a child. You're hurting him." "Sit down, ma'am, or you're coming off too," O'Malley shouted back. The cabin was in chaos. The illusion of civilized luxury had shattered. Jordan felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into his wrists. Tears stung his eyes, not from pain, but from the humiliation. He was being treated like a criminal in front of 50 people, all because a man in a suit decided he didn't belong. Preston Montgomery was smiling. It was a small, tight smile of victory. He watched as the officers began to march Jordan toward the door. "That's what happens," Preston muttered to the empty air loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. "Order is restored." As they reached the aircraft door, Jordan looked down the jet bridge. It was empty. His heart sank. She hadn't made it. He was on his own. "Move it," O'Malley shoved him forward. But just as Jordan's sneaker crossed the threshold from the plane to the bridge, a shadow fell over the entryway. The click-clack of heavy, purposeful footsteps stopped everyone cold. It wasn't the frantic run of a late passenger. It was the rhythmic, terrifyingly calm stride of someone who owned the ground she walked on. The woman blocking the exit of the jet bridge stood 5'10" in heels, but she filled the space like a monolith. Cassandra Banks was a vision of intimidating elegance. She wore a cream-colored pantsuit that cost more than the annual salary of everyone in the flight crew combined. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, flawless bun. Her sunglasses were perched on her head, revealing eyes that were currently burning with a cold, nuclear fury. She didn't look at the police officers. She didn't look at Brenda. She looked directly at Jordan, taking in the handcuffs, the tear tracks on his face, the way his shoulder was hunched from the officer's grip. The air pressure in the jet bridge seemed to drop. "Take your hands off my son," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the timbre of a gavel striking a sounding block. Officer O'Malley blinked, caught off guard. He was used to screaming mothers. He wasn't used to this. "Ma'am, step aside. This individual is under arrest for trespassing and resisting." "I said," Cassandra interrupted, stepping forward, forcing the officers to take a step back into the plane. "Take your hands off him, immediately." Brenda Gables rushed forward from the galley, sensing a new problem. "Ma'am, you cannot block the boarding door. You need to clear the area or we will have you removed as well. Who are you?" Cassandra finally shifted her gaze to Brenda. It was like a predator looking at prey that didn't yet know it was dead. "Who am I?" Cassandra repeated softly. She reached into her handbag, the officer's tensed hands drifting to their holsters, but she didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a black leather lanyard with a heavy metallic ID card encased in titanium. She held it up. It wasn't a standard crew ID. It wasn't a pilot's badge. It was a solid black card with the Regal Horizon logo embossed in actual gold leaf, followed by a single stripe of iridescent purple, the color reserved for the board of directors. "I am Cassandra Banks," she enunciated every syllable. "I am the majority shareholder of the Horizon Group, the parent company of this airline. And unless you want to be working the fry station at a fast food joint in Jersey by tomorrow morning, you will release my son." Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Brenda's face drained of color so fast she looked like she might faint. She stared at the badge. She knew the legend of the black titanium clearance. It was rumored to exist, but most employees never saw one. It meant the holder outranked the CEO. Officer O'Malley looked at the badge, then at Brenda. "Is this real?" Brenda couldn't speak. She just nodded a jerky, panicked motion. "Uncuff him," Cassandra commanded. O'Malley fumbled for his keys. His hands were shaking. He unlocked the cuffs. Jordan rubbed his wrists, stepping quickly to his mother's side. Cassandra didn't hug him, not yet. She was in war mode. She placed a protective hand on his shoulder, turning her glare back to the group. "Now," Cassandra said, her voice dropping to a dangerously low register, "I want to know exactly why my 17-year-old son, who was traveling on a ticket issued personally by my office, is in handcuffs." Captain Miller, hearing the commotion, came back out of the cockpit. He saw the badge. He saw Cassandra. His eyes went wide. "Ms. Banks, we weren't informed you were flying today." "I wasn't," Cassandra said. "I came to drop off my son, but I received a distress text saying he was being assaulted by my own staff." "Assaulted?" Preston Montgomery's voice floated from the cabin. He hadn't seen the badge yet. He just heard a woman's voice and assumed the mother had finally arrived to beg. He stood up, adjusting his tie, walking toward the galley to witness the finale. "Lady, your son is a delinquent who stole a first-class seat," Preston sneered, stepping into the galley. "He assaulted the crew with his attitude. I suggest you take him and leave before I add you to my lawsuit." Cassandra looked past the captain, past the trembling flight attendant, and locked eyes with Preston. "And who might you be?" she asked. "Preston Montgomery." He puffed out his chest. "Platinum medallion. I practically pay the salaries of these people." Cassandra let out a short, dry laugh. It was a terrifying sound. "Mr. Montgomery," she said, stepping into the cabin, pulling Jordan with her. The police officers scrambled out of her way, pressing themselves against the wall. "You generate 0.0003% of this airline's revenue. I checked your file on my way over here. You buy discounted business class fares and upgrade using miles. You are not a customer. You are a liability." Preston's mouth fell open. "Excuse me?" "You demanded my son be removed from seat 1A. Cassandra continued, walking closer to him. "Seat 1A, which I reserved for him because it is his birthday. You racially profiled a child, bullied a spineless crew into doing your dirty work, and wasted airport security resources." She turned to Brenda. "And you?" Brenda flinched. "Ms. Banks, Mr. Montgomery insisted. He said he felt unsafe." "Unsafe?" Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "Because a boy was wearing a hoodie. Did you verify his ticket?" I thought it was fake," Brenda stammered. "The system didn't show a VIP status." "Because I blocked the status so he could travel like a normal person," Cassandra snapped. "I wanted him to have a quiet flight. Instead, you showed him exactly what this company looks like underneath the marketing." Cassandra pulled out her phone. She didn't dial a number. She opened the internal executive app that controlled the airline's operations. "Captain Miller," Cassandra said, not looking up from her screen. "Yes, ma'am," the captain said, standing at attention. "Is this aircraft ready to fly?" "Yes, ma'am. We are fully fueled and catered." "Good," Cassandra said. She tapped her screen. "I am grounding this flight." A collective gasp went through the cabin. "Grounding it!" Preston shouted. "You can't do that. I have a meeting in London." "I can do whatever I want, Mr. Montgomery. I own the plane," Cassandra said calmly. "But I'm not grounding it for mechanical reasons. I'm grounding it for a personnel change." She looked at Brenda, then at the captain. "Captain, you are relieved of duty pending an investigation into your failure to protect a passenger," Cassandra said. "Brenda Gables, you are fired. Effective immediately. Retrieve your personal items and leave the aircraft." Brenda burst into tears. "Miss Banks, please, I have 30 years. I'm 3 years from my pension." "You should have thought about that before you put my son in handcuffs to please a bigot," Cassandra said, her voice devoid of sympathy. "Get off my plane." She turned to the police officers. "And you two, I suggest you file a report stating that this was a misunderstanding caused by the crew." Because if I see resisting arrest on my son's record, I will sue the Port Authority until the state of New York runs out of ink printing the settlement checks. Am I clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am," Officer O'Malley said, sweating profusely. "Come on, Diaz. We're done here." The police retreated. Brenda, sobbing hysterically, grabbed her purse and ran off the plane. Captain Miller hung his head, gathered his flight bag, and walked past them looking like a broken man. The cabin was silent. Jordan looked at his mother, awe written all over his face. He had seen her work before, but never like this. Never for him. "Now," Cassandra said, turning back to Preston Montgomery, who was now pale and trembling, realizing the magnitude of his error. What about me?" Preston stammered. I didn't know who he was. It was an honest mistake." Cassandra smiled. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Oh, we're just getting started with you, Preston." The silence in the first-class cabin was heavy, the kind of silence that usually follows a gunshot. But in this case, the weapon had been a black titanium ID card and a few softly spoken sentences. Preston Montgomery, a man who had spent the last 45 minutes expanding his chest and barking orders like a field marshal, now looked incredibly small. He was standing in the aisle, trapped between the imposing figure of Cassandra Banks and the row of seats filled with passengers who were no longer looking at their phones. They were watching him. "You said you were just getting started." Preston said, his voice cracking slightly. He tried to clear his throat to summon the arrogance that usually fueled him, but the tank was empty. "Look, Ms. Banks, surely we can come to an arrangement. I'm a businessman. I understand stress. I'm willing to overlook the theatrical nature of this misunderstanding." "Theatrical," Cassandra repeated, tilting her head. She took a step closer to him. The scent of her perfume, expensive, subtle, and sharp, wafted over him. "You called the police on a child. You called him a delinquent. You had him put in handcuffs because you wanted legroom." She looked down at the tablet in her hand. Her fingers moved with lethal precision. "Preston James Montgomery," she read aloud. "Account number 8890 Alpha Bravo. CEO of Montgomery Logistics, a mid-sized shipping coordinator in Delaware." Preston stiffened. "That is private information." "Not when it's in my database," Cassandra countered. "I see here you have accrued 450,000 miles. You're saving them for a family trip to Fiji next year, a second honeymoon." Preston's eyes widened. "How do you know that?" "Notes from our customer service line," Cassandra said breezily. "You apparently called 3 times to shout at an agent about blackout dates. You have a history of verbal abuse toward my staff, Mr. Montgomery. 14 documented incidents in 3 years. Usually we tolerate it because the customer is always right. But today," she tapped the screen once firmly. "What did you do?" Preston asked, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. "I just deleted them," Cassandra said, showing him the screen. "All 450,000 miles. Gone." "You can't do that," Preston shrieked, his face turning purple. "That's theft. That's $40,000 worth of travel." "Read the Terms and Conditions Section 9, Clause C," Cassandra recited from memory. "Regal Horizon reserves the right to terminate any account and forfeit all accrued benefits if the member engages in conduct detrimental to the airline, its staff, or its passengers." She looked him dead in the eye. "You are detrimental, Preston." "I'll sue," Preston screamed. "I'll sue you personally." "Get in line," Cassandra said, bored. She tapped the screen again. "I've also flagged your passport number in our Global Alliance system. You are hereby placed on the no-fly list for Regal Horizon and all our partner carriers. That includes British Airways, Iberia, and Qantas. Good luck getting to London. I hear the swim is invigorating this time of year." Preston looked around the cabin, desperate for an ally. He looked at David, the tech CEO, in 2A. Are you going to let her do this? She's a tyrant. This is corporate overreach. David, who had been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of shock and awe, slowly picked up his noise-canceling headphones. He looked Preston in the eye, gave a small, dismissive shrug, and put the headphones back on. Preston turned to Chloe, the fashion editor in 3A. You saw it. The kid was aggressive. Chloe didn't speak. She just held up her phone. The camera lens was pointed directly at Preston. The red REC dot was blinking. Smile, Preston, Chloe said icily. You're going to be famous. Preston lunged toward her. Delete that. Cassandra moved faster than anyone expected. She stepped in front of Preston, blocking his path to Chloe. She didn't touch him, but her presence was a wall. If you touch another passenger, Cassandra whispered, I will not call the police. I will call my private security team, and they don't carry handcuffs. They carry non-disclosure agreements and very heavy flashlights. Preston froze. He realized finally that he had lost. The cabin was a hostile environment. The air was thin. His status was 0. Get your bag, Cassandra ordered. Preston reached up to the overhead bin with trembling hands. He pulled down his leather carry-on. He looked at seat 1A, the seat he had fought for, the seat that had cost him everything. Jordan was standing there, rubbing his wrists. He didn't look triumphant. He just looked tired. Preston started looking at the boy. Maybe he thought an apology would save his miles. Maybe he thought he could beg. Don't, Jordan said quietly. Just go. Gate agents are waiting for you at the top of the jet bridge to escort you out of the terminal, Cassandra said. Do not stop at the food court. Do not stop at the restroom. Leave my airport. Preston Montgomery adjusted his suit jacket, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. He lifted his chin, turned on his heel, and began the long walk down the aisle. It was the longest walk of his life. First class was silent, but as he passed through the curtain into business class and then past the galley toward the exit, a low sound started. It was a slow clap. It started from a flight attendant in the back who had heard the commotion. Then a passenger joined in. Then another. By the time Preston reached the aircraft door, the sound of applause was ringing in his ears. They weren't clapping for him. They were clapping for his departure. He stepped onto the jet bridge into the waiting arms of 2 stern-looking gate agents and disappeared from the world of the elite forever. Inside the cabin, Cassandra let out a long breath. Her shoulders slumped just a fraction of an inch, the only sign that the confrontation had cost her anything. She turned to the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay and the disruption. A fresh crew is on their way. We will have you in the air in 45 minutes. As compensation for this ordeal, every passenger on this flight will receive a voucher for a future round-trip ticket anywhere we fly. On the house. The tension in the cabin evaporated instantly. Smiles returned. The tech CEO gave a thumbs up. Cassandra turned to Jordan. The steel in her eyes melted away, replaced by a fierce, painful love. Are you okay? She asked, reaching out to touch his face. Jordan leaned into her hand, closing his eyes. Yeah, I'm okay. Thanks, Mom. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried to keep my world away from you. I thought if I just bought the ticket and didn't put my name on the reservation, you could just be normal. I can't be normal here, Mom, Jordan said, looking at the empty seat where Preston had sat. Not when people like him are the gatekeepers. Then we change the gatekeepers, Cassandra said firmly. She guided him back to seat 1A. Sit. I'm going to stay with you until the new captain arrives. Then I have to go deal with the legal fallout of firing a union crew mid-shift. You're not coming? Jordan asked, a flash of disappointment in his eyes. I can't, she said. I have a board meeting in New York that I was already late for. But, when she smiled, I think you'll be safe now. I've put a note on the manifest. What does it say? It says, son of the boss. If he asks for a soda, give him the whole can. Jordan laughed. It was a weak laugh, but it was real. Cassandra kissed his forehead, straightened her blazer, and turned to leave. But she stopped at row 3A. Ms. Chloe, Cassandra said to the fashion editor. Chloe looked up, slightly startled. Yes, Ms. Banks. That video, Cassandra said. The one you recorded. I can delete it, Chloe said quickly. I didn't mean to pry. No, Cassandra said, a dark smile playing on her lips. Don't delete it. Upload it. Post it everywhere. Tag him. Tag the airline. Tag me. Chloe grinned, her thumbs already moving over the screen. With pleasure. The flight to London was uneventful, but only in the sense that the plane stayed in the air. Inside Jordan's mind, and on the ground below, a storm was brewing that made the earlier confrontation look like a light drizzle. The new crew was terrifyingly attentive. The new purser, a man named Timothy, treated Jordan like he was made of spun glass. He brought sparkling water before Jordan could even ask. He offered extra pillows, 3 different meal options, and checked on him every 15 minutes. Jordan sat in 1A, staring out the window at the clouds over the Atlantic. The physical cuffs were gone, but he could still feel the phantom weight of them on his wrists. He replayed the moment over and over, Preston's sneer, the officer's grip, the feeling of absolute powerlessness. He realized something profound at 35,000 feet. His mother's money could save him, but it couldn't hide him. Without the badge, without the title, he was just a target. He pulled out his phone. He had paid for the in-flight Wi-Fi. He opened Twitter X. The first thing he saw on the trending tab was #firstclassracist. He clicked it. The video Chloe had recorded was already at 4 million views. It was a masterclass in shaky cam justice. It started mid-argument, capturing Preston screaming, "I practically pay the salaries of these people," and ended with Cassandra's icy demolition of his miles and the applause as he walked off. The comments were a waterfall of fury and vindication. @FlyHigh9. Did she just delete his miles in real time? OMG, the power move. Queen. @Justice for Jordan. Imagine being so racist you lose your frequent flyer status and your dignity in 5 minutes. Karma is swift. @TechBroDave. I was on this flight. The guy was a nightmare. The kid was just chilling. The mom is Cassandra Banks. She owns the airline. Dude picked a fight with God. Jordan scrolled, feeling a strange mixture of validation and anxiety. His face was blurred in the video. Chloe had been respectful enough to focus on Preston, but everyone knew who his mother was now. Meanwhile, on the ground in New York, the fallout was hitting Preston Montgomery with the force of a freight train. Preston was sitting in the back of an Uber stuck in traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway. He had been escorted out of the terminal by security like a common criminal. He was trying to rebook a flight on his phone, but every app was giving him errors. Expedia booking failed. British Airways, user restricted. Delta transaction declined. Damn it! He slammed his phone against his knee. His phone rang. It was his office line. Montgomery Logistics, this is Preston, he barked. Preston, it's Sarah. His assistant's voice was trembling. Preston, what is happening? The phones haven't stopped ringing for 20 minutes. What are you talking about? People are calling and screaming, Sarah said. They're canceling contracts. The Henderson account just pulled out. They said they don't do business with what, Sarah? With viral bigots. Preston, have you checked your email? Preston minimized the call and opened his email. His inbox was flooding. Hate mail, obviously, but worse notifications from his business partners. Subject: immediate termination of partnership. Subject: vendor review, urgent. Subject: LinkedIn account, flagged for review. He opened LinkedIn. His profile, which he had meticulously curated for a decade, was being bombarded. Someone had found the video. Someone had identified him. The internet sleuths had done in 1 hour what the police would take weeks to do. They had found his company, his public posts, his old tweets. His reputation wasn't just damaged, it was being nuked. Preston felt his chest tighten. He couldn't breathe. The walls of the Uber felt like they were closing in. He rolled down the window, gasping for air, the smell of exhaust fumes filling his lungs. "Driver," Preston gasped. "Turn around. Take me home." "I can't turn around here, buddy," the driver said, looking in the rearview mirror. Then the driver squinted. He looked at his phone, which was mounted on the dashboard, playing a video on a news loop. He looked back at Preston. "Hey," the driver said, his voice hardening. "Wait a second. You're that guy, from the plane." Preston shrank back into the seat. "Just drive." "I saw that video," the driver said, slowing the car down. "My nephew looks like that kid you tried to arrest." "I didn't try to arrest anyone," Preston lied. "Please just take me to Connecticut." The driver pulled the car over onto the shoulder of the highway. The hazard lights clicked on. "Get out," the driver said. "What? You can't leave me here. It's the highway." "It's my car," the driver said, turning around. "And I have the right to refuse service to anyone who makes me feel unsafe." "Isn't that what you said?" Preston stared at him, mouth agape. The words tasted like ash. "Get out." Preston Montgomery, former Platinum Medallion member, former CEO of a functioning logistics company, opened the door. He stepped out onto the dirty shoulder of the Van Wyck Expressway. It began to rain. As the Uber sped away, splashing dirty puddle water onto his Italian suit, Preston realized the true power of the blacklist. It wasn't just about planes. It was about exile. Back in the sky, Jordan watched the sunset from seat 1A. The Wi-Fi pinged again. A new email from his mom. Subject: "One more thing. Jordan, I know today was hard. I'm sorry. But I want you to know something. I didn't just fire Brenda and ban Preston to punish them. I did it to show you that you never have to accept less than what you deserve. You belong in first class. You belong in the boardroom. You belong wherever you want to be. P.S. I looked into Preston's business holdings. Horizon Group has a shipping contract with his firm for our cargo division. I just canceled it. It represented 60% of his annual revenue. Happy birthday. Love, Mom." Jordan smiled. He put his headphones back on. The bass kicked in. He reclined the seat all the way back, closed his eyes, and for the first time that day, he finally fell asleep. But the story wasn't over. The video had done more than destroy Preston. It had awoken something else. The viral nature of the incident had caught the attention of someone far more dangerous than a logistics manager in Delaware. Deep in the corporate offices of a rival airline, a man named Sterling Vance, CEO of Aero Global, was watching the clip on a loop. He didn't care about the racism. He didn't care about the boy. He cared about the ID card Cassandra had flashed. The black titanium clearance. "She used the override protocol," Vance muttered to his VP. "She exposed herself." "So?" the VP asked. "So?" Vance smiled, lighting a cigar. "That card gives her absolute authority, but it also links her personally to every liability on that aircraft. If we can prove she abused her power to bypass federal security protocols, We can ground her entire airline. And the drama on Flight 902 was resolved, but the war for the skies was just beginning. While Jordan slept over the Atlantic, the ground beneath the bank's empire began to shake. Arthur Gould, CEO of Aero Global and Horizon's fiercest rival, saw the viral footage not as a justice piece, but as a weapon. "She broke protocol," Gould murmured to his general counsel in Chicago, watching Cassandra flash the black titanium badge. "She overrode federal officers. That's a national security violation. Leak it. Frame it as a billionaire playing by different rules. If we strip her license, I buy her routes for pennies." By the time Jordan's plane descended into Heathrow, the narrative had flipped. He turned on his phone, expecting victory. Instead, he found Hatchet Boycott, Horizon. Headlines screamed billionaire tycoon bypasses, security, and FAA launches investigation. Jordan felt sick. He had just wanted a seat, but now he was watching his mother's legacy crumble. Meanwhile, in a dingy motel in Queens, a disgraced Preston Montgomery stared at the same news nursing cheap whiskey and a shattered ego. His phone rang. "Mr. Montgomery," a smooth voice intoned. "This is Arthur Gould. I believe we share a common enemy." Preston sat up. "The woman who ruined me." "I can help you get it all back," Gould promised. "I'm launching a class action lawsuit. I need you to testify that you saw Cassandra Banks physically threaten the police, that she acted like a maniac." "But she didn't." Preston hesitated. "Do you want to live in this motel forever? Or do you want $10 million and a seat on my board?" Preston looked at his stained cuffs. Survival outweighed truth. "Tell me what to say." 2 days later, an emergency oversight hearing was set in Washington, D.C. If the Aviation Ethics Committee found Cassandra in violation of the Secure Skies Act, she would lose her operating license. In the Capitol holding room, Cassandra looked tired but resolute. Jordan sat beside her, adjusting a suit she'd bought him in London. "Mom," Jordan said quietly, "blame me. Tell them I was acting out. Don't lose the company for this." Cassandra turned her eyes blazing with fierce affection. "Jordan, look at me. This company is just planes and fuel. I would burn every jet in the hangar to the ground before I let a man like Preston Montgomery put chains on you again." "But Gould is going to win," Jordan insisted, showing her the news feed. "Preston is testifying that you assaulted the cops." Cassandra smiled, a cold, calculated expression of a grand master seeing a checkmate. "Arthur Gould is a smart man, but he forgot one thing." "What?" "He forgot who built the security system he uses on his own planes." The bailiff opened the door. "Ms. Banks, the committee is ready." The hearing room in D.C. was a pressure cooker of flashing cameras and murmuring press. Arthur Gould sat smugly beside a polished, rehearsed Preston Montgomery. Senator Higgins banged his gavel. "Ms. Banks, you are accused of utilizing unauthorized executive clearance to obstruct federal law enforcement. Mr. Gould alleges your actions on Flight 902 compromised national airspace safety." Gould stood, buttoning his jacket. "It's simple, Senator. Ms. Banks used her wealth to intimidate police. My witness, Mr. Montgomery, will testify that he was terrified for his life when she stormed the aircraft with a security detail." "Lies!" Preston shouted, emboldened by the cameras. "She had thugs. She threatened to kill me. She's a maniac." The room buzzed. The narrative was working. Cassandra looked like a tyrant. "Ms. Banks." Higgins peered over his glasses. "Do you have a defense?" Cassandra stood alone. She walked to the center of the room, placing a small silver flash drive on the podium. "Senator," she began, her voice calm. "Mr. Gould believes the black titanium badge is merely a status symbol. He is mistaken. The titanium level was designed after 9/11 as a mobile black box. When activated, it becomes a walking surveillance unit, encrypting high-fidelity audio and video directly to the cloud. Gould's face went ashen. "I have the recording of the entire interaction," Cassandra said. "But I have something even more interesting." She plugged in the drive. The screens flickered to life. First, the video showed the jet bridge Cassandra walking alone, calm and collected, contrasting sharply with Preston's screamed racial slurs. The room fell silent, but Cassandra wasn't finished. "That clears the assault charge. Now here is the audio from yesterday." The screen went black, but the audio was crystal clear, the ambient noise of a restaurant. Gould's voice. "Preston, you need to lie. Say she hit the officer." Preston's voice. "But she didn't." Gould's voice. "I don't care. I'm paying you $10 million to bury her. Once she loses her license, Aero Global buys her routes for pennies." Senator Higgins turned slowly to Gould, his face red with fury. "Mr. Gould, did you just conspire to commit perjury before a congressional committee?" Gould knocked his chair over, panicking. "That recording is illegal, wiretapping. It's a federal security device authorized by the FAA. Cassandra cut in a sharp smile, playing on her lips. "You signed the bill that made my badge legal 3 years ago, Arthur. You built the trap yourself." As Capitol Police moved in, handcuffing a sobbing Preston and a stunned Gould, the room erupted. Cassandra turned back to Jordan, who was watching the Horizon stock price rocket upward on his tablet. "How did you get that audio?" Jordan whispered. "You weren't near them yesterday." "Brenda Gables was," Cassandra winked. "She begged for her job back. I told her if she wore a wire to her meeting with Gould, I'd let her keep her pension." 6 months later, JFK Airport was bustling. Jordan Banks walked through the terminal, not in a hoodie, but in the crisp uniform of a Horizon Flight Academy cadet. He stopped at the gate for Flight 902. The agent smiled. "Seat 1A, Mr. Banks. Enjoy." Jordan took the ticket, but paused. Near the counter stood a teenager, maybe 16, clutching a standby slip and looking anxiously at the floor, the universal look of someone who felt they didn't belong. Jordan walked over. "Flying standby." The kid nodded nervously. "Hoping for a seat in the back." Jordan looked at his first-class ticket, then at the boy. He remembered the feeling of being small-judged and unwanted. "Here," Jordan said, swapping his ticket with the kid's slip. "What, no, this is first class." "Take it." Jordan smiled, adjusting his cap. "If anyone asks if you belong there, tell them you own the seat." As the kid walked toward the front of the plane in disbelief, Jordan headed for the back, whistling. He didn't need 1A to feel important anymore. He knew that real power wasn't in the seat you sat in, but in the hand you extended to pull others up. The story of Jordan and Cassandra Banks serves as a powerful reminder that prejudice is fragile when faced with truth. Preston Montgomery and Arthur Gould thought their status could crush a boy, but they underestimated a mother's ferocious love. In the end, the black titanium badge wasn't the hero, it was merely the tool that exposed the rot beneath the expensive suits. Justice wasn't just served, it was delivered first class. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please destroy that like button. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to stand up for themselves, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, Brian. A check lai title file lu ko jung title can viet. They saw a hoodie, ripped jeans, and dark skin, and they assumed she was a runaway or a charity case. When 16-year-old Sandra Vance sat in seat 1A of first class, the flight crew didn't just mock her, they actively conspired to humiliate her. Brenda, the senior attendant, laughed in her face, threatening to drag her off the plane for theft of services. They thought she was powerless. They were wrong. They didn't realize that the black SUVs racing across the tarmac weren't coming to arrest Sandra. They were coming to salute her. By the time the cabin doors opened, careers would end, and the airline would face a wrath worth billions. The fluorescent lights of JFK International Airport hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz. It was 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, the peak of the morning rush, and Terminal 4 was a sea of business suits, rolling luggage, and frantic parents. Moving through the crowd like a ghost was 16-year-old Sandra Vance. She didn't look like the typical clientele for Royal Meridian Airways transatlantic flight to London. She wore a slightly oversized charcoal hoodie, vintage denim jeans with intentional tears at the knees, and scuffed high-top sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and large, noise-cancelling headphones rested around her neck. To the casual observer, she looked like a tired teenager, perhaps traveling to visit a distant relative, or maybe a student on a budget. She approached the priority check-in counter, the one marked with red velvet ropes and a gold sign that read, "First Class and Diamond Medallion, Members Only." Standing behind the podium was Gary Thorne. Gary was a man in his late 40s who wore his uniform a size too tight, a desperate attempt to hold on to his youth. He prided himself on being the gatekeeper of the elite experience. He scanned the line, offering obsequious smiles to men in Italian suits, but his expression curdled when he saw Sandra duck under the rope. "Excuse me," Gary barked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "Miss, you're in the wrong lane." Sandra paused, adjusting her backpack. She looked up, her eyes calm and dark. "This is the first-class check-in for Flight 882 to London, right?" Gary let out a short, derisive snort. He didn't look at her documents. He looked at her shoes. "It is. Which is why you need to be over there." He pointed a manicured finger toward the chaotic economy line that snaked back toward the entrance doors. "Economy and coach drop-off is that way. You're blocking the path for our actual priority guests." "I have a ticket," Sandra said softly. She held out her phone, the screen displaying a QR code with the distinct gold border of a first-class boarding pass. Gary didn't reach for the scanner. He crossed his arms, leaning over the podium with a sneer. "Look, kid, I don't know if you screenshotted your daddy's ticket or if you're trying to pull a TikTok prank, but I don't have time for it. We have Senator Higgins arriving in 10 minutes. Move along." The people in line behind Sandra began to shuffle impatiently. A woman with a Louis Vuitton tote bag sighed loudly, checking her watch. "Come on, let's go," someone muttered. Sandra didn't flinch. She had been raised in boardrooms and embassies. She knew how to handle bullies in cheap suits. "My name is Sandra Vance. I'm booked in seat 1A. If you scan the code, it will clear. If you refuse to scan the code, you are denying boarding to a ticketed passenger without cause. I believe that's a violation of federal aviation regulations, Gary." She read his name tag deliberately. Gary's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. The audacity of this teenager, this black teenager, lecturing him on regulations made a vein in his temple throb. He snatched the scanner aggressively. "Fine," he spat. "But when this beeps red, I'm calling security to have you escorted out of the terminal for loitering." He aimed the laser at her phone screen, praying for a rejection tone. Beep, beep, green light. The screen on Gary's monitor flashed. "Passenger. Vance Sandra. Status. VIP. Priority. Highest. Gary stared at the screen. The system had to be broken. There was no way this girl was highest priority. That code was reserved for diplomats and A-list celebrities. He looked back at her, convinced she had hacked the system. "The machine is glitching," Gary lied, his voice loud enough for the queue to hear. "It's flagging this as a fraudulent purchase. Stolen credit card, likely." The crowd gasped. The woman with the Louis Vuitton bag stepped forward. "Oh, for heaven's sake, I knew it. Security." Sandra's expression hardened. "It's not stolen. Check the card on file. It's a corporate black card issued to Vance Global." "I'm not checking anything," Gary snapped, feeling the power of the crowd on his side. "Step aside. I'm going to process these paying customers, and then I'm going to deal with you and the police." Sandra took a deep breath. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming black phone. Not her smartphone, but a satellite device. She pressed one button. "Gary," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "You have exactly 10 seconds to print my boarding pass and check my bag, or you will explain to your station manager why you delayed a shareholder." Gary laughed. Actually laughed. "Shareholder? Listen to yourself. You're delusional." Suddenly, the printer behind Gary whirred to life. It spat out a boarding pass with a golden stripe. His monitor flashed a message from the central dispatch. "Override authorized. Board passenger immediately." Gary froze. He looked around, confused. He hadn't touched the keyboard. "My pass?" Sandra held out her hand. Gary, trembling with a mix of rage and confusion, ripped the paper from the machine and shoved it at her. "Don't think this is over," he whispered. "I'm radioing the crew. They'll keep an eye on you. One wrong move and you're off." Sandra took the pass, adjusted her headphones, and walked away. "Have a nice day, Gary." The walk down the jet bridge was usually a transition into luxury, but for Sandra, it felt like walking into a trap. Gary had made good on his threat. As she stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere was icy. Brenda Miller, the purser and lead flight attendant, was waiting at the door. Brenda was a woman who wore her authority like a weapon. She had stiff, blonde hair, sprayed into a helmet of perfection, and a smile that didn't reach her cold, calculating blue eyes. She greeted the businessman ahead of Sandra with warmth. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson. Can I get you a glass of champagne before takeoff?" Then she saw Sandra. The smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pinched disapproval, as if she smelled something rotting. Sandra stepped aboard, holding her boarding pass out. "Seat 1A. Brenda didn't take the pass. She blocked the aisle with her body. "Hold on, let me see that." She snatched the paper, scrutinizing it under the cabin lights, rubbing the ink with her thumb to see if it was fake. 1A? This is a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Sandra said, feeling the eyes of the entire cabin on her. "Seat 1A is reserved for full-fare passengers," Brenda announced loudly. "This ticket must be an employee pass or a standby upgrade that got processed wrong. We have a Diamond Medallion member who requested the bulkhead. You need to move." "I paid full fare," Sandra stated. "I selected 1A 3 weeks ago." Brenda scoffed, leaning in close, her voice dripping with condescension. "Look, sweetie, we don't do this here. We have respectable people trying to relax. I'm going to do you a favor and find you a seat in economy comfort. You'll have more leg room for your type of crowd." "My type of crowd?" Sandra repeated. The question hung heavy in the air. "Young people," Brenda corrected quickly, though the racial undertone was deafening. "Loud. Rowdy. First class is a quiet zone." "I haven't said a word other than to ask for my seat," Sandra said, stepping around Brenda. She moved toward 1A, a spacious suite with a lie-flat bed. She tossed her backpack into the overhead bin and sat down. Brenda turned purple. She marched over to the cockpit door, whispered something to the pilot, and then stormed back to Sandra's seat. "Fine," Brenda hissed. "But if I hear a peep out of you, if you play your music too loud, if you disturb Mr. Henderson, if you so much as sneeze wrong, I am having the captain turn this plane around. Do you understand me?" Sandra didn't look up. She had already opened a book on advanced calculus. "I understand that you're providing terrible service, Brenda. Could I get a water, please?" Brenda stared at her, her mouth agape. "The water," she said through gritted teeth, "is for guests during meal service. You can wait." As Brenda walked away, Mr. Henderson in 1B, a kind-looking older man with white hair, leaned over. "Miss, I'm sorry about her. I don't know what her problem is." "I do," Sandra said quietly. "She thinks I don't belong here." "Well," Henderson smiled, "you handle yourself better than most CEOs I know." Sandra offered a weak smile. She just wanted to get to London. Her father, Marcus Vance, was closing the merger between Vance Hargrave Tech and a British defence firm. She was supposed to meet him for the celebratory dinner. She didn't want trouble. But trouble, it seemed, was determined to find her. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin was darkened. Most passengers were sleeping. Sandra was watching a documentary on her screen, her headphones on. She needed to use the restroom. She quietly unbuckled her belt and stood up. The first-class lavatory was just a few feet away at the front of the cabin. As she reached for the handle, Brenda emerged from the galley, blocking her path again. "The restroom is occupied," Brenda lied. The sign clearly said, "vacant" in green. "The sign says green," Sandra pointed out. "It's broken," Brenda snapped. "You have to use the one in the back, behind row 40. "That's the entire length of the plane," Sandra said. "I am a first-class passenger. I am entitled to use the first-class lavatory. And I am the chief stewardess, telling you that this bathroom is for priority maintenance," Brenda smirked. "Walk to the back. Exercise is good for you." Sandra sighed. It wasn't worth the fight. She began the long walk down the aisle, through business, through premium economy, and into the back of the plane. As she walked, she could feel the eyes of other passengers. When she returned 10 minutes later, chaos had erupted in the first-class cabin. All the lights were on. Brenda was standing in the aisle, pointing a finger at Sandra's empty seat. A woman from seat 2A, a socialite named Mrs. van der Hoven, was clutching her pearls, looking theatrically distressed. "There she is!" Brenda shouted, as Sandra stepped back through the curtain. Sandra stopped. "What is going on?" "Don't play innocent with me," Brenda said, her voice trembling with faux rouge. Mrs. van der Hoven's diamond tennis bracelet was on her tray table. She went to sleep. When she woke up, it was gone. "You're the only one who has been walking up and down the aisle." Sandra felt her blood run cold. "I went to the bathroom. You told me to go to the back." "A convenient excuse to roam the cabin," Brenda accused. "Empty your pockets. Now." "I didn't take anything," Sandra said firmly, her voice rising slightly. "Check the floor. Check her bag." "We checked everywhere," Mrs. van der Hoven wailed. "It's a $20,000 bracelet. That girl took it. I saw her looking at me earlier." "I haven't looked at you once," Sandra said. "I am not asking," Brenda said, stepping forward, looming over Sandra. "I am telling you. Give it back, or we will have the police waiting for you in London." "Actually, no. I'm not waiting for London." Brenda grabbed the interphone and keyed the pilot. "Captain, we have a situation. We have a theft in progress, and the suspect is becoming belligerent. I don't feel safe. We need to divert." The cabin gasped. Mr. Henderson stood up. Now wait a minute. This is ridiculous. She didn't take anything. I've been awake the whole time. Sit down, sir, Brenda yelled, unless you want to be charged as an accomplice. She turned back to Sandra, a twisted smile of triumph on her face. You picked the wrong flight, little girl. You thought you could use your fake ticket and steal from the rich? We're diverting to Gander, Newfoundland. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police will handle you. Sandra looked Brenda dead in the eye. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She reached into her hoodie pocket. Brenda flinched, expecting a weapon. Sandra pulled out her satellite phone again. "Put that away," Brenda screamed, swatting at Sandra's hand. "No phones allowed." Sandra dodged the slap and pressed the emergency distress button on the side of the device. It wasn't a normal distress signal. It was a code black beacon used by high-risk executives and their families. It sent a signal not to the police, but to Vance Global Security Command. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Brenda," Sandra said calmly. "Sit down!" Brenda shrieked. She grabbed a pair of plastic flex cuffs from the emergency kit. "I am restraining you for the safety of the flight." Brenda and a junior flight attendant, who looked terrified but followed orders, forced Sandra into her seat. They zip-tied her hands together. Sandra didn't resist. She sat back against the leather seat, the plastic digging into her wrists. She looked out the window as the plane banked sharply to the left, beginning its descent toward the remote Canadian airport. She closed her eyes and counted backward from 100. She knew what was happening. The beacon had been triggered. The signal included her biometrics and location. Somewhere in a command center in Virginia, a screen had just turned red. The Boeing 777 descended through the thick, grey cloud layer of Newfoundland. The captain, Captain Miller, no relation to Brenda, but equally arrogant, had announced to the passengers that they were making an emergency landing due to a security threat involving a passenger. When the wheels slammed onto the tarmac of Gander International Airport, the mood inside the plane was toxic. The passengers were furious about the delay, and Brenda had successfully directed all that fury toward Sandra. "I hope you're happy," Mrs. van der Hoeven spat from the row behind, "ruining everyone's trip." Sandra sat silently, her wrists bound. She knew the truth. The bracelet was likely in the woman's purse, or slipped down the side of the seat. But truth didn't matter to people like Brenda. Power mattered. The plane taxied to a remote part of the airfield, far from the terminal. It was snowing lightly outside. "Stay in your seats," Brenda commanded the cabin. "The police are boarding to remove the suspect." The cabin door opened. The freezing wind swirled in. 2 local police officers stepped on board, looking confused. They had been told there was a violent threat. They saw a 16-year-old girl zip-tied in a hoodie. "Is this the suspect?" one officer asked, his hand resting on his belt. "Yes," Brenda pointed a shaking finger. "She stole jewelry and threatened the crew. She's dangerous." The officer approached Sandra. "Miss, you're under arrest for theft and interfering with a flight crew. Stand up." Sandra stood up slowly. "The jewelry is in her bag," she said calmly, nodding to Mrs. van der Hoeven. "And I suggest you look out the window before you touch me." "Quiet," the officer barked. He reached for her arm to pull her into the aisle. Suddenly, a roar drowned out the wind. It was the sound of engines, not jet engines, but helicopters. Through the open cabin door, everyone saw it. 2 blacked-out military-grade helicopters banked low over the airfield, their rotors kicking up a storm of snow. At the same time, 3 large black SUVs tore across the tarmac, ignoring airport security protocols. They screeched to a halt right at the bottom of the mobile stairs. The police officer froze. "Who is that? Is that Special Ops?" Men in tactical gear spilled out of the SUVs. They didn't look like local police. They wore black uniforms with no insignia, just a small silver V on their chests. They carried assault rifles, held at the low ready. The lead man, a giant of a human being named Luther Graves, stormed up the stairs. Luther was the head of executive protection for Vance Global. He was 6'5", bald, and had a scar running down his cheek. He looked like a man who ate tanks for breakfast. The local police officers instinctively stepped back, their hands raising. "Whoa, hold on, who are you?" Luther ignored them. He stepped into the cabin, his presence filling the space. He scanned the room and locked eyes with Brenda. Brenda, who had been so loud and powerful moments ago, suddenly looked very small. Then Luther saw Sandra. He saw the zip ties. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luther's face went from professional stone to lethal rage. "Who?" Luther rumbled, his voice like grinding gravel. "Put cuffs on her." Brenda stammered. She is a criminal. Who are you? You can't be here. This is a sterile area." Luther walked past the police officers as if they weren't there. He pulled a knife from his vest, a large, serrated combat blade. Mrs. van der Hoeven screamed. Luther gently took Sandra's hands and sliced through the plastic zip ties in one fluid motion. He checked her wrists for bruises. "Are you hurt, Miss Vance?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm okay, Luther," Sandra said, rubbing her wrists. "Just humiliated." Luther turned slowly to face Brenda and the captain, who had just emerged from the cockpit. "You," Luther pointed at the captain. "You diverted a Vance Global aircraft." "Vance Global?" The captain blinked. "This is a Royal Meridian flight." "Check your ownership logs, genius," Luther snarled. "Royal Meridian was acquired by Vance Holdings at 9:00 a.m. this morning. My boss, Julian Vance, owns this plane. He owns this airline. And you just arrested his daughter." The silence in the cabin was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Brenda's face went white. "His daughter?" "And," Luther continued, turning to Mrs. van der Hoeven, "we scanned the cabin with thermal imaging from the drone before we boarded. The stolen bracelet. It's inside the lining of your carry-on bag. You dropped it." Luther reached over, grabbed Mrs. van der Hoeven's bag, unzipped a side pocket, and shook it. The diamond bracelet fell onto the floor with a clatter. "Oops," Sandra whispered. Luther tapped his earpiece. "Boss? We have her. She's safe, but you're going to want to hear what they did to her." He looked at Brenda, who was now trembling so hard her teeth chattered. "Brenda Miller," Luther said, reading her name tag. "Mr. Vance is on the video link. He wants to speak to you. Now." Luther held out a tablet. On the screen was the face of Julian Vance, one of the richest men in the world, and he looked murderous. The wind outside howled across the Newfoundland tarmac, but inside the cabin of the Boeing 7707, the silence was heavier than lead. Luther Graves held the tablet up with a steady, granite-like hand. On the screen, Julian Vance, the CEO of Vance Global and a man whose net worth rivaled the GDP of small nations, sat in a dimly lit office in New York. His face was calm, which was far more terrifying than if he were screaming. "Brenda Miller!" Julian's voice came through the tablet speakers, crisp and amplified. "Look at me." Brenda, shaking so violently, her flight attendant scarf fluttered, forced her eyes to the screen. Mr. Vance, I didn't know. Nobody told me." "You didn't know she was my daughter?" Julian asked softly. "Tell me, Brenda, if she were not my daughter, if she were just a 16-year-old girl traveling alone who had paid for a ticket, would your behavior have been acceptable?" Brenda stammered, looking for an exit that didn't exist. She looked suspicious. She didn't fit the profile. I was protecting the passengers." "The profile," Julian repeated, tasting the word like spoiled milk. You mean the color of her skin and the style of her clothes? You profiled a child, humiliated her, denied her services she paid for, and then fabricated a theft to cover your own incompetence. Mrs. van der Hoven said her bracelet was stolen, Brenda shrieked, pointing at the socialite who was currently trying to shrink into her seat. Mrs. van der Hoven. Julian's eyes shifted on the screen, addressing the woman in 2A. My security team has already run a background check on you while this plane was descending. Your husband, Richard, works for a subsidiary of Sterling Bank, doesn't he? Mrs. van der Hoven paled. Yes. What does that have to do with this? Sterling Bank handles the payroll accounts for Vance Global, Julian said dryly. Or they did. As of 5 minutes ago, I have ordered the transfer of all our corporate accounts to your competitor. Your husband is going to have a very interesting conversation with his boss tomorrow morning about why the bank lost its biggest client because his wife couldn't keep track of her jewelry. Mrs. van der Hoven burst into tears. No, you can't do that. It's done, Julian said, dismissing her. He looked back at Brenda and Captain Miller. Now, regarding the crew. Captain, you allowed a purser to dictate the security of your ship without verifying the threat. You diverted a transatlantic flight based on racial bias. That is gross negligence. I followed protocol, the captain argued, though his voice was weak. You followed prejudice, Julian corrected. And here is the reality. I didn't just buy your ticket, Captain. I didn't just buy the plane. While you were in the air, my legal team executed a hostile takeover of Royal Meridian Airways. The deal closed at 10:45 a.m. Julian leaned into the camera, his eyes cold blue steel. I am your employer, and I am firing you, both of you, for cause, effective immediately. You are no longer authorized to fly this aircraft. Brenda gasped. You can't leave us here, in Gander, in the snow. You are trespassing on private property, Luther Graves interjected, his voice booming in the cabin. This plane belongs to Vance Global now. You are no longer crew. You are unauthorized civilians. Luther signaled to his tactical team. Escort Mr. Miller and Ms. Miller off the aircraft. They can find their own way back to New York. I believe there is a Greyhound bus station in town. No, please! Brenda grabbed onto a seat back. I have a pension. I have 20 years of seniority. You have nothing, Julian said from the screen. And Brenda, you will be hearing from my personal attorneys regarding the false imprisonment of a minor and defamation of character. You won't just be unemployed, you will be unhirable. 2 tactical officers grabbed Brenda and the captain by the arms. As they were dragged down the aisle, kicking and screaming, the economy passengers, who had been watching the drama unfold through the open curtains, erupted into applause. Luther turned to Sandra. Miss Vance, your father is sending the Gulf Stream to pick you up. It will be here in 30 minutes. But first, Luther turned to the local Canadian police officer, who was standing there, completely bewildered. Officer, Luther said, I believe you have a false police report to file. The officer looked at Brenda, who was being hauled down the stairs into the snow, and then at the diamond bracelet on the floor. He nodded grimly. Yeah, I think I do. Filing a false report is a criminal offense in Canada. We'll go pick her up at the tarmac gate. Sandra stood up, rubbing her wrist where the zip ties had been. She looked at Mr. Henderson, the kind man in 1B. I'm sorry for the delay, she said softly. Mr. Henderson chuckled, raising his glass of champagne. My dear, that was the best in-flight entertainment I have ever witnessed. Go get 'em. The fallout did not happen all at once. It began as a tremor, a digital vibration that started the moment Mr. Henderson uploaded his video from the tarmac in Gander. But within 48 hours, That tremor had become a catastrophic earthquake that would level the lives of everyone who had stood in Sandra Vance's way. It started with the silence of the cell phones, then the screaming of the notifications. Gary Thorne sat in his dimly lit one-bedroom apartment in Queens. It was a Tuesday, his day off, but he hadn't slept. His phone had been buzzing incessantly since 4 a.m. with text messages from co-workers, friends, and even his ex-wife. He hadn't answered any of them. He sat on his worn-out beige sofa, staring at the television. The local news was on mute, but the chyron at the bottom of the screen was screaming in bright red letters, "Airline racism scandal. Vance Global sues for millions." Gary took a sip of lukewarm coffee, his hand trembling. "It's not me," he whispered to the empty room, trying to convince himself. "I just did my job. The machine glitched. They can't prove anything." Bam! 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 The knocking on his front door shook the thin walls. It wasn't the polite knock of a neighbor. It was the authoritative, heavy-handed pounding of someone who legally demanded to be heard. Gary froze. He waited, hoping they would go away. "Gary Thorne, we know you're inside. Open up, or we call the superintendent to key us in." Gary shuffled to the door, unlocking the deadbolt with clammy hands. He opened it a crack. Standing in the hallway were two men. One was a process server in a cheap windbreaker. The other was a man in a sharp, charcoal-grey suit who looked like he cost $1,000 an hour. "Gary Thorne?" the suit asked. He didn't wait for an answer. "I am lead counsel for the plaintiff in the matter of Vance vs. Thorne." The process server shoved a thick, bound stack of documents into Gary's chest. The weight of the paper nearly made him stumble back. "You have been served," the server said. Gary looked down at the cover page. The words swam before his eyes. "Civil action, No 24 CV 091. Plaintiff, Sandra Vance, Vance Global Holdings. Defendant, Gary Thorne. Charges, defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, civil rights violations, 42 U.S.C. paragraph 1981, loss of business reputation." "I don't have any money," Gary stammered, looking up at the lawyer. "I'm just a gate agent. You can't sue me." The lawyer smiled, a shark-like baring of teeth. "We aren't just suing you for money, Mr. Thorne. We are suing for assets. We've already been granted a preliminary freeze on your bank accounts, pending the hearing. Your savings, your pension fund, your 2018 Ford F-150. It's all frozen." "My truck?" Gary's voice cracked. "You froze my truck." "We intend to garnish your wages for the next 25 years, the lawyer said calmly, checking his watch. "Or until the settlement amount of $10 million is paid. Have a nice day." Gary watched them walk away. He dropped the papers on the floor. His knees gave out, and he slid down the doorframe until he hit the carpet, realizing his life as he knew it was effectively over. 500 miles north, the reality was colder and far more confined. Brenda Miller sat in a holding cell at the Gander RCMP detachment. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. She was still wearing her Royal Meridian flight attendant uniform, though now it was rumpled, stained, and stripped of her gold wings and name tag. She had demanded to see the American ambassador. She had demanded to see the union representative. Instead, she got a court-appointed Canadian defense attorney named Mr. Levesque, a tired-looking man who seemed to have zero sympathy for her. He entered the cell and tossed a file onto the metal table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Bad news, Miss Miller," Levesque said, not bothering to sit down. "Get me out of here," Brenda hissed, trying to summon her old authority. "This is a misunderstanding. I want to go home to New York." "You aren't going to New York," Levesque said flatly. "The Crown prosecutor has decided to make an example of you. They are charging you with public mischief and filing a false police report. In Canada, that carries a maximum sentence of 5 years. 5 years? Brenda shrieked. For a bracelet? It was a mistake. It was a lie, Levesque corrected. And here is the kicker. Because the victim was a minor, and because the incident occurred on an international flight, the FBI has opened a concurrent investigation. Even if you serve your time here, you will be deported back to the US to face federal charges for interfering with a flight crew. Ironic, considering you were the crew. Brenda felt the blood drain from her face. But the airline, the union, they'll protect me. Levesque let out a dry, humorless laugh. The airline? Brenda, the airline is owned by the girl's father now. He fired the entire legal department this morning and hired his own team. The union has disavowed you. They released a statement an hour ago, calling your actions reprehensible and indefensible. You are alone. Brenda slumped onto the metal cot, staring at the grey concrete wall. The silence of the cell was deafening, broken only by the realization that she had traded her career, her freedom, and her reputation for the momentary satisfaction of bullying a teenager. In Manhattan, the atmosphere was frantic. In the corner office of a high-end law firm, Richard and Martha van der Hoven were watching their social standing disintegrate in real time. Richard, a high-ranking executive at a major investment firm, was pacing the floor, his face a mask of fury. Martha sat in a leather chair, clutching a tissue, her eyes red and puffy. They cancelled the country club membership, Richard, Martha wailed. The committee sent an email. They said we are undesirable elements. Shut up about the damn country club, Richard roared, spinning around. I just got off the phone with the CEO of Sterling Bank. Do you know what he told me? He told me to clean out my desk. 30 years, Martha. I gave them 30 years. And I'm fired because my wife decided to frame Julian Vance's daughter for theft. I didn't know who she was, Martha sobbed. It shouldn't matter who she was, Richard yelled, throwing a crystal paperweight against the wall. It shattered, much like their future. You hid the bracelet. The forensics report is irrefutable. Your fingerprints are on the inside lining of your bag. You committed a felony. Their lawyer, a calm man named Stein, cleared his throat. Mr. and Mrs. van der Hoven, please. We need to focus on damage control. Vance's legal team has offered a settlement to avoid criminal prosecution for the fraud. We'll pay it, Richard said quickly. How much? $1 million? 2? They don't want your money, Stein said, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Vance was very specific. He wants a confession. A public one. No. Martha shook her head frantically. I can't. Everyone will see it. If you don't, Stein warned, Mr. Vance will hand the forensic evidence to the district attorney. You will go to Rikers Island, Martha. And Richard, you will likely be named as an accessory after the fact for trying to cover it up initially. Richard walked over to his wife. He didn't hug her. He grabbed her shoulders and looked her in the eye with cold detachment. You are going to sit in front of that camera, Richard said, his voice low and dangerous. And you are going to apologize. You are going to tell the world exactly what a petty, racist liar you are. Because if you don't, and I lose the house in the Hamptons because of legal fees, I will divorce you before you even make bail. Martha trembled. The makeup she had carefully applied that morning was streaked with tears. She looked at the camera crew setting up in the corner of the lawyer's office. Fine, she whispered, broken. An hour later, the video was live. Martha van der Hoven, stripped of her pride, looked into the lens and confessed. I targeted Sandra Vance because I didn't believe someone like her belonged in first class, she said, her voice shaking. I hid my own bracelet to get her in trouble. I am sorry. Sandra Vance watched the video from the comfort of her father's study. Julian Vance stood behind her, a hand on her shoulder. "Is it enough?" Julian asked quietly. Sandra turned off the iPad. She looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. "It's not about being enough, Dad. It's about making sure they never do it to anyone else." "They won't," Julian promised. "They don't have the power to hurt anyone anymore." The avalanche had settled. The landscape had changed, and the path was finally clear. 1 year had passed since the incident that became known globally as the Gander Turning Point. JFK International Airport, Terminal 4, was no longer the place it used to be. The oppressive atmosphere of the old Royal Meridian check-in counters, with their velvet ropes that felt like barricades and staff who sneered at anyone earning less than 7 figures, had been completely exorcised. In its place stood the flagship terminal of Vance Aviation. The branding was sleek, modern, and intentionally welcoming. The pretentious gold and crimson color scheme of the old airline had been stripped away, replaced by a calming slate blue and silver. The rigid priority lanes that once segregated passengers like cast members were gone. Instead, open-concept kiosks and roaming agents with tablets moved through the crowd, helping everyone with equal efficiency. The most striking change, however, was the culture. Under Julian Vance's ownership and his daughter's moral compass, the airline had instituted a zero-tolerance policy for bias. But it was more than just rules. It was a vibe. The staff looked happy. They weren't stressed, overworked gatekeepers anymore. They were hosts. At 9:08 a.m. on a bright Tuesday morning, a hush fell over the main concourse. It wasn't the silence of fear, but of respect. Sandra Vance walked through the automatic doors. She was 17 now, a year older and a lifetime wiser. She no longer wore the oversized hoodie that she had used as armor on that fateful flight. Today, she wore a tailored navy blazer, a crisp white shirt, and dark jeans. She looked every inch the heiress to a multi-billion-dollar empire, but she carried herself with a humility that money couldn't buy. She wasn't alone. Flanking her was Luther Graves, the mountain of a man who still served as the head of executive protection. But walking on her right was a new face, or rather, a face from the past that had been given a new future. It was Marcus King. A year ago, Marcus had been a 22-year-old ramp agent for Royal Meridian. He was the guy loading bags in the freezing rain. He had been fired by Gary Thorne 2 weeks before Sandra's incident, because Marcus had dared to let an elderly woman sit in a wheelchair in the first-class lounge while she waited for her economy flight. Gary had called it theft of services and terminated him on the spot. Sandra had found him. She had read his personnel file during the acquisition audit. She hired him back, paid for his security training, and made him the team lead for her personal detail. Now, Marcus wore a bespoke suit and an earpiece, walking with his head held high through the very terminal where he had once been treated like garbage. "Terminal is secure, Miss Vance," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We have clear passage to gate B32. "Thanks, Marcus," Sandra smiled. "And please, I told you, in the terminal it's just Sandra." "Copy that, Sandra," Marcus grinned. They made their way toward the check-in area. But today wasn't a business trip. Today was the inaugural launch of the Vance Global Wings of Change Scholarship. Waiting by the gate were 20 high school students. They came from the toughest neighborhoods in New York, Chicago, and Detroit. They were brilliant kids, coders, engineers, artists, who had never left their home states, let alone the country. Sandra was taking them all to Tokyo for a 2-week technology and robotics summit, all expenses paid. As Sandra approached the group, she saw the nervous excitement on their faces. She saw herself in them, the hesitation, the feeling of, do I belong here? She high-fived the nearest student, a boy named Leo, who was clutching a sketchbook. "Ready for Japan, Leo?" "I think so," Leo stammered. "I've never been on a plane before." "You're going to love it," Sandra promised. "Just don't look down at takeoff if you're scared of heights." As the group organized themselves, Sandra felt a pair of eyes on her. It was a heavy, mournful gaze that she could feel prickling the back of her neck. She turned slowly toward the far wall, near the janitorial supply closet. There, holding a mop and a yellow bucket, was a man who looked decades older than his actual age. His hair was thinning and grey. His shoulders were slumped in permanent defeat. He wore a grey jumpsuit with a generic contract cleaning company logo on the chest. It was Gary Thorne. The lawsuit had been merciless. The civil judgment had taken everything: his savings, his truck, his condo in Queens. He had filed for bankruptcy, but the debt from the intentional torts wasn't dischargeable. He was ruined. The aviation industry had blacklisted him. No airline would trust him with a passenger manifest. The only work he could find was with a third-party sanitation vendor. His daily reality was cleaning the floors of the terminal he used to rule like a petty tyrant. Gary stopped mopping as Sandra looked at him. His hands gripped the wooden handle so tight his knuckles turned white. He waited for her to point. He waited for her to laugh. He waited for her to tell Marcus to have him removed from the area. He expected her to do exactly what he would have done if the roles were reversed. Sandra stared at him for a long moment. Marcus stepped forward, his body tense, ready to intercept. "Do you want me to move him along, Mom?" Sandra raised a hand. "No, Marcus. It's fine." She walked over to Gary. The terminal seemed to hold its breath. Gary flinched as she got close, his eyes darting to the floor. "Hello, Gary," Sandra said softly. Gary looked up, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. "Miss Vance?" His voice was a rasp, stripped of all its former arrogance. "The floors look clean," she said. It wasn't sarcasm, it was a simple observation. I'm doing my best," Gary whispered, shame coloring his cheeks a deep crimson. "Look, I just want to say, I know I can't apologize enough, but I lost everything. I'm paying for it every day." Sandra looked at the man who had tried to humiliate her. She searched her heart for anger, for that burning desire for revenge she had felt on the plane a year ago, but she couldn't find it. The fire had burned out, leaving only a cool, indifferent clarity. "I didn't take everything from you, Gary," Sandra said, her voice calm and devoid of malice. "You gave it away. You traded your life for a moment of feeling superior to a teenager in a hoodie. That was your trade." She stepped back, signaling that the conversation, and their connection, was over forever. "I hope the floors stay clean," she said. She turned her back on him. She didn't look back to see him crumple over his mop handle, weeping silently. He was a ghost of the past, and she had a flight to catch. Sandra returned to the gate where the students were lining up. The gate agent, a cheerful woman named Sarah, no relation to the student, beamed at them. "We are ready for boarding, Miss Vance. We have the entire upper deck reserved for your party." Sandra nodded. "Let's go." They walked down the jet bridge. The plane was a brand-new Airbus A380, the crown jewel of the Vance fleet. As they stepped onto the aircraft, the students gasped. To the left was the stairway leading to the upper deck suites. To the right was the main cabin. The students naturally started drifting to the right, toward economy. They had been conditioned by society to expect the back of the bus. "Myriad," Sandra called out. "Where are you going?" The group stopped. A girl named Sarah, a 16-year-old coding prodigy from the Bronx, with braids and thick glasses, looked at her confused. "To our seats." Sandra smiled and pointed to the stairs. "Upstairs, everyone." "Upstairs?" Sarah asked, her eyes widening behind her glasses. "But isn't that first class?" "It's Vance class," Sandra corrected. And today, you're the VIPs. The students erupted in whispers and cheers as they scrambled up the stairs. Sandra followed them up. The upper deck was a sanctuary of luxury. Individual suites with sliding doors, lie-flat beds, massive entertainment screens, and a lounge area with a bar that served smoothies and snacks. The students were afraid to touch anything. They stood in the aisles, looking at the leather seats as if they were museum exhibits. Sandra walked to the front, to Suite 1A. It was the best seat on the plane. It was spacious, private, and had a panoramic view. It was the seat Sandra had booked for herself. She looked at Sarah, the girl from the Bronx. Sarah was standing near the back of the cabin, looking at a smaller seat, clearly trying not to take up space. She held her backpack in front of her like a shield. Sandra remembered that feeling, the feeling of needing to be small to be safe. "Sarah," Sandra called out. The girl jumped. "Yes, Miss Sandra. Come here, please." Sarah walked up the aisle, nervously pulling at the sleeves of her sweater. Sandra gestured to Suite 1A. "This is your seat." Sarah froze. She looked at the suite, then at Sandra, then back at the suite. "Me? Oh, no, no, I can't. That's the boss seat. That's your seat." "I'm not the boss today," Sandra said, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "I'm just the host. You worked hard for that scholarship, Sarah. You coded an entire app on a library computer because you didn't have internet at home. You earned this seat." "But what if I break something?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "What if I don't know how to use the buttons?" Sandra leaned in close, her voice fierce and kind. "Then you ask, and the crew will help you, because you belong here, Sarah. Do you understand me? You belong in this seat. Don't let anyone, ever, tell you otherwise." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She nodded slowly. She stepped into the suite, sat down in the massive leather chair, and for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to expand. She stretched her legs. She put her arms on the armrests. She smiled. Sandra turned to the cabin crew, who were watching with misty eyes. "Take care of them," Sandra instructed. "Where will you be sitting, Ms. Vance?" the purser asked. "I'll be downstairs in row 40, Sandra said, picking up her bag. "I have a lot of reading to do, and I like the white noise in the back." As Sandra walked down the stairs to the economy cabin, leaving the luxury to the next generation, she felt lighter than she ever had in a private jet. She found her seat in the back, near the window. She buckled her belt. Next to her sat an elderly woman, knitting a scarf. The woman looked at Sandra. "You look familiar, dear," the woman said. "Do I know you?" Sandra smiled, pulling her headphones down around her neck. She looked out the window as the massive engines roared to life, pushing them forward, away from Gander, away from the past, and toward a horizon that was finally wide open. "I'm just a traveler," Sandra said. "Just like you." The plane lifted off, soaring into the clouds, leaving the shadows on the ground where they belonged. Sandra Vance's journey from a profiled teenager to a visionary leader proves that true power isn't about status. It's about character. The crew of that fateful flight tried to break her spirit by stripping away her dignity, but they only succeeded in revealing her strength. They judged her by her appearance, never realizing they were messing with a force that would dismantle their entire world. Sandra didn't just win a lawsuit. She rewrote the rules. She showed us that the best way to destroy an enemy is to build a world where their kind of hate can no longer survive. She turned her pain into a ladder for others to climb. If this story of ultimate redemption and justice inspired you, please hit that like button. It helps us share these stories with more people. Make sure to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Who would you give your first-class seat to? Let us know in the comments below.